Welcome everybody, my name is Lily and I'm the founder of the Rising Network, and welcome to today's webinar, Doing What You Said You'd Do, The Art of Getting Things Done, with our wonderful guest speaker, Helen Morris, who is a business psychologist with over 20 years experience helping people to be more productive and satisfied at work. I'd like to hand over to Helen now for her session on doing what you said you'd do in the art of getting things done.
So thank you very much for that introduction, Lily. My name is Helen Morris Brown, and this is what I do for a living. I'm a business psychologist, and I have the pleasure of delivering presentations and seminars in organisations and online, with a view to helping people to be more productive, more satisfied with their jobs, and sometimes even happier at work. And I've been helping people to improve their performance for over 20 years now. And in that time, I've collected a lot of tips and tools and information that I like to share with people just like you. As a psychologist, I'm quite data-driven. I like to do research and I gather facts so that I can share it with people who frankly can't and shouldn't be bothered to do it for themselves. And working with people in organisations for as long as I have means that I've got an insight into the kinds of things that people really struggle with in their day-to-day lives, and that includes work. From my experience, there's only a handful of things that keep cropping up that people really struggle with. And when I say struggle, I mean the things that most people find difficult in their jobs and sometimes in their home life. Because most people have experienced those things, I'm pretty sure that if I asked all of you now to name them, you could, but we don't have time to do that. So I'm going to share them with you instead. Here they are. The first one, not surprisingly, is communication. It, along with one other thing, is the biggest thing that people come to me with as a main problem. Change, as Lily said, is, in her introduction, it's something that we can't avoid, but it is definitely something that people struggle with, even minor change. We still haven't quite worked out how to process that change effectively and come out the other side unscathed, particularly when it's large change. It discombobulates us, so it's why it's one of the main problems. Taking decisions. When I was first a manager, someone walked into my office and said, "Can you tell me how to take decisions?" And it wasn't a stupid question. It is when you're faced with those difficult dilemmas, when you're feeling blocked and you can't make progress, is to say, how do I make a decision? And there is a method for it, and it's why people struggle with it. And until you know those methods and you've experienced it for yourself, it's difficult to overcome it. Reaching goals, which is why we're talking today about that subject. That, with second to communication, is one of the biggest things I have to talk people through in organisations. They really struggle with it. Control. This is much more about having control over your own destiny and your own work patterns and the way you do things. Not having control over that is one of the biggest causes of stress at work and at home. And it's a huge subject, but it definitely warrants being in the top group of things that people struggle with. Then there's the emotions, the thing that makes us human and stands us out from other species. It's really tricky. We can't avoid them. We have to deal with them, and we have to learn to handle them, accept them, and show them in functional ways. And quite often that goes wrong, particularly in organisations when we're working with people that we're not emotionally connected to. So that brings me to the last one, which is this: other people. And the reason that these things, all these things, keep coming up time and time again is because we are essentially hardwired to want the same thing. We are a social species and we want to live a stress-free life, doing the things that make us happy, with the people that make us happy. And every one of those things has the potential to get in the way of that happiness. Because each of those things has the potential to block our path. These are the hurdles that we have to overcome. So today I'm going to focus on one of the things that I said is the most common that people struggle with, and that is reaching goals, or as I like to call it, getting things done. So I'm going to give you some tips and some tools on how to do what you said you'd do. And while I'm doing that, I'll explain why it's important for your health and well-being, which ties into what Lily was saying about the purpose of the Rising Network. It's about improving health, well-being, and trying to reduce stress if we can. When I ask people to tell me why they're not able to get things done, why they can't finish that important report, or why they gave up on something that they've started, they usually blame motivation. So they'll say things like, I wasn't motivated, I lost my motivation, my manager is really demotivating. Quite often they'll say, I didn't see the point of that anymore because something else came up that was more important. A myriad of excuses. But what it boils down to is the fact that they're not motivated to complete it. They can't actually see it through. And through the work I've done, I've come to the conclusion that it's less about motivation and more about having the wrong attitude and approach to to-do lists, projects, and goals. And that might sound like a really big thing to change, but believe me, it's easier to help someone change their attitude and behavior than it is to motivate them. Now, this in itself is a huge topic, so I'm not going to attempt to unravel all of it. I'm not going to rehash the 7 habits of highly effective people or pretend that I have a metaphorical golden ticket that's going to enable you to always do what you said you do. But what I can do is highlight a few things that are all linked to getting things done. So in the next half hour, I'm going to talk about matching expectations, goal setting, doing what you said you'd do, and the nutritional qualities of wax candles. But first, I'm going to talk about our brains and the power of dopamine. Now, dopamine is often called the happy hormone. It flows into your brain every second of every day. It surges when good things happen. It's linked to rewards like, I don't know, winning a contract, meeting a deadline. You know, when you get the crystal in the crystal maze, when those things happen, dopamine hits these areas of your brain. And that's completely normal. It's normal because we rely on it for movement, for momentum. People with Parkinson's are given a synthetic version of it because they can't produce it naturally. We cannot function without it. And along with other neurotransmitters, it plays a crucial part in our ability to get things done. And it doesn't matter whether we're planning to climb Everest or whether we have to deal with something difficult at work. When we're faced with a challenge, our motivation is fueled by the knowledge that once it's done, we're going to be rewarded. We're going to feel that dopamine hit our brain, or we're going to experience it. Now, that psychological reward is either going to be an exhilarating feeling because you've achieved something you didn't think you could achieve, or it's going to be a sense of relief from having completed something that's been on your to-do list for some time and you might have struggled with it. Because if you think about it, our confidence to tackle something difficult comes from our previous experiences. It's the only reference point we've got. So when we experience success, whether it's experiencing something we set out to achieve, or whether it's having a good interaction with a colleague or a business associate, we will have experienced that sense of reward. We'll feel good about it. That's because when things go well, that surge of dopamine in our brain, which triggers a sense of satisfaction, allows us to feel good inside. It gives us this warm glow. And when that happens, we associate the behavior at the time with what we're doing or who we're interacting with. And normally when it's happening, we associate them with good feelings. And that gives us the confidence to repeat that interaction or what we did over and over again. But here's the thing. Things don't always go to plan. we miss deadlines, people let us down, bad things happen. And we often end up feeling stressed. And when that happens, when things aren't going our way, we often don't actually have excess energy to work out why it's happened. Depending on our nature, we're either going to analyze what went wrong so we can rectify it, we're going to punish ourselves, or wallow in self-pity. And sometimes we might bury our head in the sand and pretend it didn't happen. Now, while all those behaviors are different and they can be described differently, they're actually all symptoms of the same thing. And that's a thing that happens when something hasn't matched our expectations. Because when things don't match our expectations, it can be quite discombobulating. It can be quite alarming. Now, I'm going to try and demonstrate this. I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint for a minute so that you can see a full video of me, and then we'll try and do it that way. But I just want to demonstrate what I mean with this. So you should be able to see me now. And here I've got a box of candles with a regular candle in it. And all I'm going to do is light the candle as you would. Feels like a bit of a religious experience, really, doesn't it? There you go. Get it nice and flowing to light the day. You know what? I'm glad I put water there. That's really quite sticky. I'm going to come back to sharing now. There we go. Wow, now unless you were expecting me to eat that, that will have come as a bit of a shock to most of you. And now you're trying to figure out what just happened, aren't you? Your mind is in overdrive and you're probably a little bit confused like the picture. That's because a lot happened to you when you saw me do that. Your heart rate increased, the hairs on your arms stood up, sweat glands were activated, and that was a completely automatic response. You couldn't help it. It was beyond your control. That shock to your system triggered a process in your brain that isn't going to stop until you've made sense of it. You're thinking, it's not a real candle. She's just eaten a piece of cake or a marshmallow shaped like a candle. Or you're thinking, I'm possessed by the devil. That mismatch of expectation caused a cascade of activity in your brain that resulted in a physical response. It was an automatic response and you couldn't control it. By the way, if you did come up with either of those explanations, I'm sorry, you're not right. And if you doubt me, next time you try and have a piece of cake or a marshmallow, try setting light to it before you eat it. Anyway, that aside, what has this got to do with getting things done and doing what you said you'd do? Well, if you're constantly in that state, if you're constantly in a state of high alert, using excess energy to process what's happening in your environment, like you were when you saw me eat that candle, then you'd be in a perpetual state of confusion. And that is not sustainable. Just ask Boris Johnson. Because our brains need a smooth ride to function well. We don't like surprises. We're not able to handle that kind of disruption. It usually results in negative emotions and unhelpful behavior. And that's because we're hardwired to deal with the unexpected as we would have done thousands of years ago, when all we had to think about was sex, survival, and protecting our young. Our brains have not evolved significantly enough to respond differently. Now, given that the chemicals in our brain affect our motivation to complete what we set out to do, we have to make sure that we don't upset that natural flow of chemicals. And the easiest way to do that is to make sure that you match expectations. You have to match expectations in everything you do. Because if someone says or does something you weren't expecting, or more likely doesn't do something you weren't expecting, it's going to be unsettling. And you're going to associate them with the emotions you experienced when they surprised you, disappointed you, or made you angry. And if that happens more than once with the same person, it'll almost certainly result in you wanting to avoid them in the future. And if you're feeling that about other people, you can bet your bottom dollar they're feeling it about you if you don't match their expectations. Because our brain is much happier, much calmer, and we actually perform better if we consistently match our own expectations and the expectations of other people. So what we're aiming for when we're trying to overcome challenges and when we're dealing with other people is the exact opposite of what happened when I ate that candle. What we're aiming for is something called cognitive ease. And that is really hard to achieve when you're trying to get something done or someone is getting on your nerves. Because in both those situations, you are going to be primed to be on high alert. And the type of stress that we encounter in the modern world, it might be completely different to what our ancestors were dealing with, but actually we're primed to respond in exactly the same way we would have done when we were facing these things. If we perceive a threat, we react to it. If we feel uncomfortable, we take steps to try and avoid it in the future. The modern day equivalent of this is actually this, and people like this. Because each time you experience this stress, each time your survival instinct kicks in, your body releases a surfeit of cortisol. Now, cortisol has got some benefits, but too much of it has got a negative impact on our immunity, our digestion, and our endocrine function. And these are critical things for our health and well-being. We don't need cortisol like we did when we were fighting off saber-toothed tigers. So we need to limit the amount that is in our system. So how do we counter the effects of things which, let's face it, are part and parcel of our lives and we can't eliminate them that easily? How do we deal with that? Well, let's first counter the effects of what you've just seen by replacing it with that. And that should potentially get you into a state of cognitive ease more than you were with the previous slide. But we can't always eliminate problems that easily. So how can you get your brain into a state of cognitive ease when you're feeling really stressed? When all you want to do is tell someone what you really think of them, or give up on a project that seems impossible to finish, or just throw in the towel? Well, I've learned that there's actually two things we can do. One is to take back control, and the other one is to not be so hard on yourself. Whenever I deal with people in organizations who are struggling to achieve their goals or are feeling overwhelmed with their to-do list, or more likely they are wearing a badge of honor that means they procrastinate, 9 times out of 10 it's because they're working too hard and they don't feel in control of the situation. And quite often it's because they don't know how to set goals effectively, which means that they're not getting things done or seeing progress in the way they want to see it. And that is a vicious cycle. Because if you're not getting things done and you're not seeing progress, then you won't be experiencing that sense of reward that you need to keep you motivated. And everyone you work with will be on your case because you're not doing what you said you'd do. And that's why knowing how to set goals and achieve them is so important. Now, like most things I talk about in organizations, this looks and sounds really straightforward. But we all know there's a trick to getting things done and achieving what we set out to achieve. Otherwise, there wouldn't be business books covering the shelves of W.H. Smith at the airports about it. We all want to know the secret. So here's what I've learned over the past few years that I think might help you to get more things. Number 1 is to work out what your goal is. Now, this is the hardest bit, and this is the bit we often need help with, but because it sounds so straightforward, we often don't look for help. If you use this model, you're much more likely to get a goal that you can achieve. Now, I covered this briefly on the last webinar, and I'm sure, given the network of people that Lily's connected with, the majority of you will have seen this before and perhaps use it every day. But I don't think there's any harm in refreshing it and emphasizing the importance of using it each time you set a goal. A goal has to be specific. It has to be something that you can measure as an endpoint. So you have to be able to understand when you will have achieved it, when the finish line is. That's your measurable aspect of it. It has to be achievable. So it has to be realistic. And if it's not, then you have to rethink. This is often when I get to the point in coaching when I discuss whether the goal they've told me about is achievable, we review it and come back and reduce the size of the goal so that it is achievable. Now, the relevance of it, the R in SMART, is really important, because what we know psychologically is if someone else tells you to do a goal or reach a goal and do things and you have no vested interest in it, it's not relevant to you, there's very little chance of you achieving it. People just aren't motivated to achieve things for other people. So it has to be relevant to you. And there has to be a time limit to it. There has to be a deadline, even if it's just to review where you are on that specific goal. Otherwise, it's like Parkinson's law, if you've heard of Parkinson's law. The time it takes to do a job fills the time available. So if you put an endpoint on it, if you give yourself a deadline, it's going to work. Much more likely to work. Can't guarantee it. Recently, I signed up to complete something called the Saharan Challenge. This was a goal for me. I wanted to set myself a challenge that was relevant and would give me something to achieve. So I wanted to experience the dopamine rush for a start, but also I wanted to complete it and be able to talk about it on the business circuit. There were two measurable outcomes for me. One was achieving it alive, and the other one was just to achieve it. So there were two measurable outcomes, but actually I have signed up for it. But in terms of SMART goals, the challenge in itself isn't very smart because it doesn't seem achievable. It's 2 marathons back to back on consecutive days. It's going to be really hard. So I've had to break it down into manageable chunks. So the specific goal for me now is to ensure that I turn up fit and ready by this date. And this is the state of play as of this morning. That's my time-bound goal for achieving it. And if you don't use apps for productivity, then you really should start doing it now. There's so many out there to help you understand timelines, deadlines, give you reminders. It's really useful to use. This one is more likely to send my head burying into the sand, as I said before. But the point is that I've had to use the SMART objectives to ensure that I'm going to achieve this. Otherwise, I'm going to be in trouble. The second thing you need to do is plan your roadmap. Now, if you don't break down that challenge, big challenges, into smaller steps, you're very likely to not be able to achieve it. So my roadmap for the Sahara Challenge is to walk at least 50 kilometers each week for the next 6 weeks. And then after that, I'm going to reassess it. And then when I've achieved that, I can up the ante. You have to, what we call in sort of training circumstances, we often refer to breaking the elephant down into manageable chunks. You have to do that in order to give yourself the best chance of reaching the end goal. The biggest mistake people make is not breaking their challenges into bite-sized chunks, so they set themselves up for failure. And it's a really simple thing to do. It's just people forget to do it. Step 3 is to take action, is to just get on with it, not procrastinate, and just do it. Because until you do that, you won't experience that dopamine rush. You just have to do it. If you remember the book, Going on a Bear Hunt, if you haven't seen it or used it for any reason, it's a great book. And It's about the philosophy of not having, you can't go under it, you can't go over it, you have to go through it. You just have to get on with it. To keep the dopamine flowing, you have to see progress, and you're not going to see progress until you take action. So in terms of the Saharan challenge, that end goal isn't actually going to motivate me to carry on. It's more likely to deter me. So I've had to break it down into those steps in order to maintain the momentum and to keep me going. And the way I do that is just complete smaller challenges all the way up to the time that I take off to complete the challenge itself. And in that way I can keep my dopamine levels topped up. Because that, knowing that that's happening in my brain each time I achieve a small step, means that physiologically I'm going to be able to continue what I'm doing. So if you can remember that when you're tackling something, the aim for you should be to send the right messages to your brain, and that will motivate you. And if you get that right, you're much more likely to be successful in your end goal. Step 4 is to review what you've done. And most of your time when you tackle something will be spent doing it. Some of it will be spent planning it, but there's a bit that people often miss out, and that is reviewing it. And that's, that can be learning from mistakes. It can be changing the deadline. Most importantly, you have this time planned out so that you review where you are, what's going well, what's not going well, and to learn from your mistakes. To continue doing the things that are going well and stop the things that are preventing you from reaching that goal. It's also an opportunity to acknowledge where you're at and the achievements you've reached. Make note of those achievements. Tell people, shout about it, because that progress is going to lead to reward and the physiological response to reward, which will keep you motivated. If you do all of that, you will reach your destination. You will reach your goal and experience success. That all sounds really straightforward, doesn't it? That's because it is, in theory. It's so simple, it can be illustrated using a smart art graphic. You start with a goal, you make a plan, you do it, you review it, you do it again, and you reach your goal. So what is the problem? Why is it that people struggle to get stuff done? Why is it that when we set out to do something, we often don't make it to that end point? Well, in order to improve our success rate at achieving our goals, we have to look at the things that are likely to block us, understand what they are, and get rid of them or overcome them. But most importantly, you just have to do what you said you'd do. And I'm starting to believe that it all comes down to this. The practicalities of goal setting is useful, and it's only one part of it. It's the psychology behind getting things done that's crucial. And the psychological aspect of getting things done can be summed up in this really simple statement of commitment. Now, I really believe that if you stick to that rule, then you're more likely to reach your goal. It's about making psychological contracts with yourself and with other people. And generally, the research on setting goals and achieving them is pretty conclusive. If you tell people what you're going to do, and that means you as well, just by externalizing it, you are 95% more likely to achieve that goal. That's because we're hardwired to be liked. It's in our DNA to be part of a gang. And it's important that we're trusted. It's important to us. We hold it dear to our heart. And doing what we said we'd do means that our friends and colleagues are more likely to think that we are amazing. And I can pretty much guarantee that if you tackle each goal, however big, using this approach, which is the combination of practical goal setting and psychological commitment, you will definitely see an improvement in the number of things that you get done, the number of things you succeed at. Because when you consistently do what you said you'd do, it breeds loyalty. And that helps to build better relationships, which shows you can be trusted. But it also has another positive effect. It builds your inner confidence to tackle bigger, more challenging goals. And when people think you're reliable and they associate you with getting things done, it starts to rub off on you. You start to believe it yourself. And that's all I have on this. I mean, those are my top tips for doing what you said you'd do and getting things done, because it boils down to these three things. You set out what you're going to do, you tell people what to expect, and then you do it. Because if you consistently match expectations, avoid disappointing people by doing what you said you'd do, people are going to trust you. And if you can be trusted at work, at home, in every aspect of your life, it's going to have a positive impact on your health, your well-being. It's going to reduce your stress levels, and it's going to improve the relationships you have with other people. And so for that reason, I don't think you've got anything to lose by trying it out. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Helen. And I'm sure if everyone was in the room with you, we'd all be applauding you right now. Thank you so much for that boost to help us kind of goal set and how to break down our goals into more bite-sized chunks. That was really interesting. I wonder if you can, we've got a few questions.
Sure.
But I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit more on the psychological commitment aspects. If someone is kind of struggling with that, what tools or any techniques to help overcome that barrier?
Well, quite often when I ask people who they've told about it, they, initially say, yeah, I've told everyone about it. And then when we really drill down, they haven't actually made a definite commitment to it. And by definite commitment, I mean a written record and sharing it with someone who has a vested interest in it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you share it with the postman or someone you meet at yoga, because psychologically they're transient people. We might be best buddies with the people we do yoga with, and that's a different thing. But it has to be with somebody that we know will track us and are part of our social network, part of our gang.
Mm-hmm.
And what we know about social gangs and networks is we can't actually keep committed and connected to much more than 50 people. There's sort of power of 50 in that.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to know that you trust them, they trust you, and that they're going to keep a check on it. And in that way, by externalizing it, having a written record of it and having someone to check in with means that we're much more likely to make that psychological commitment work. But it can work on your own. For strong introverts, I've known that they've not needed to share it with anyone else, but actually externalizing it onto paper, having a written record, using whatever app they have as a productivity app and checking them, it will make them achieve it.
Okay, so that brings us on to Olivia. Are you still there? She has asked a question about, well, what app would you recommend?
In terms of productivity apps, it totally depends on your personality, really, and the way you like to do things. If you're very logical and process driven and like step stage things, then Todoist is quite good. There is Trello.
There's Monday.com is a good one.
Yeah, I mean, Trello and Todoist seem to be the most popular in the workplace, particularly Trello boards people like because things get bumped. But the thing with productivity apps is that they aren't human. It's artificial intelligence, so it misses that emotional aspect of it, which is why they're only part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I would urge people not to rely on them, but use them as a tool to supplement the other stuff they're doing with their social interactions, because if you miss out, it's not going to work. You have to verbalize it, you have to talk to people, you have to have that eye-to-eye contact where you've said to someone, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, so it's almost like having an accountability buddy, if that. Okay,
exactly.
Great.
And they have to be in your close social network at work or home. They have to be someone who has a vested interest. They're part of your gang.
Sure. Okay, thank you. So we've got another question from Shahid. I've got it here. So it says, what techniques, I guess this kind of crosses over to what you've just said, what techniques do you utilize to overcome procrastination and move towards daily motivation and action?
Well, one thing I do is just tell myself to do it. And then I go through a process of asking myself what's stopping myself.
Yeah.
It's the most productive question I ask in coaching, and I ask myself, is what is stopping you from doing this? And the just do it swoosh is so relevant to this. If you are ever procrastinating, just stop planning. If you love planning, you're much more likely, in that bell curve that I showed, you're much more likely to spend more time in the planning stage than you are doing. The main thing is to be aware of it. And by asking the question, it means that you know that you're aware of it when you're doing it. And asking for feedback as well. So if other people see you procrastinating or flag up that you might be, listen to them. I mean, it's the fear thing, isn't it, that I talked about a bit on the 7 keys of high-performing teams. Yes. If you fear something, you're more likely to make it happen. So through procrastination, we tend to think more about what's going to go wrong than is going to go right. Yeah. And what's happened when we're procrastinating is that dopamine surge is stopped. So my advice is do anything it takes to keep that dopamine going again, and feel the sense of reward. And quite often people procrastinate because their goal is too big. Okay. So set yourself another goal that you can achieve within an hour or a day, that you know by the end of the day you've accomplished it. Because if you're not seeing progress, you will procrastinate. It's really that simple.
Okay, so break it down to achievable goals.
Yeah.
So would you
experience that sense of reward?
Yeah.
Because that will take you to the next step.
Okay.
People procrastinate because their goals are too big.
Sure. Okay, so Beth has asked a question. Okay, so what if you haven't got those close relationships with people in the environment around you? So again, it's that whole accountability piece and sharing your goals with others.
Well, there's quite a few million people in the UK working, and we have access to them through the wonders of the internet and social media. And I don't personally do it myself, but I do know people that interact with people they'll never meet, or are likely to meet, but know that they're like-minded, they work in the same industry, and that they can peer support networks. So locate a peer support network that's online, where you can interact with other people and make those connections.
If I can add to that, Beth, that's what we do here at the Rising Network. So we provide that peer-to-peer support, and so we offer that online, but we also offer that face-to-face. And being a member, part of the network, you'll have access to that. So does anybody else have any more questions? We've got a few more minutes remaining. So fear can be a barrier too. Many of us procrastinate because we fear the fear of failure. How do you turn that fear into something that can drive you forward rather than stop you from progressing?
Well, if you haven't read the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, I would recommend it. But actually, the book in itself doesn't go much further than the title. It's a natural response to feel afraid. There's something you can look at on the internet called the comfort, stretch, panic zone model. And what we know is, it's a very simple model. We either operate in a comfort zone, a stretch zone, or a panic zone. When we feel fear, we often have got into the panic zone too quickly, because we only learn, develop, and achieve stuff when we're in the stretch zone. We don't learn anything new or do anything different in our comfort zone. It's just an automatic response. We're just good at what we do. But if you want to do something else, if you want to achieve something beyond your ordinary capabilities, you have to go into this stretch zone. But sometimes people miss that and they go straight into the panic. So they jump into the deep end without having gone through the process of getting from the shallow end to the deep end. So the Sahara Challenge is a good example of that. If I hadn't mapped out, that is quite a frightening prospect of walking in the desert in 40 degrees heat, 2 marathons, consecutive days, and knowing whether I'm going to do it. The fear of that sends me into a panic zone, which is why I have to backtrack and do everything I can to prepare, rehearse, and set myself up to build myself confidence and inner confidence to believe that I can do it. So when I get there, it's only in the stretch zone, not in the panic zone. And that's all you can do. If you find yourself in the panic zone, come straight back, down a peg or back a step and say, what can I do to give myself confidence to take the next step? But at the end of it, you just have to do it. And it doesn't matter if things go wrong sometimes. It's okay to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm. And so what would you say, it's that whole self-belief that you can do it to then take action. So what would you advise if someone is not feeling they don't have that self-belief?
Well, to do something that gives you the belief, gets the dopamine flowing, and it will have a knock-on effect of going, okay, I can do that. I can do that.
Okay.
But you just have to do it. You just have to do it and make sure that you're not in the panic zone and feel okay about being in the stretch zone. Understand it as a psychological thing. Understand what your brain is doing. Understand that the messages hitting your brain are, we have not evolved. The reason you're feeling that is because at some level you think a saber-toothed tiger is on your heels. Reassure yourself with the fact that your brain is playing tricks on you. That saber-toothed tiger is not there. And it is something that you can manage.
Okay, so we're going to have to wrap up. We've got 2 more minutes, but Rachel has just asked, can you explain the candle stunt, please?
Can I explain it? I ate a candle. I lit a candle and I ate it. I know. Shocking, isn't it?
Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Helen, for an insightful talk on goal setting and the kind of psychological motivations behind getting things done.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Remind people that they can ask me questions on Twitter.
Absolutely. If you want to find Helen, she is on Twitter. Helen, what's your Twitter?
Is Hell's Bells with 3 L's and 3 L's. So Hell's Bells on Twitter and _real MB on Instagram.
There we go. So
feel free to contact me. I'll be willing to answer any questions outside of this webinar.
Thank you. Do follow. I hope you enjoyed the session. Once again, thank you so much to Helen. Have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.